Can you hear me? For many years, this robotic voice became one of the most recognizable voices in the world. Behind that voice was a man whose body had slowly stopped moving, but whose mind never stopped exploring the universe. On March 14, 2018, the world lost one of the greatest scientific minds in history. Stephen William Hawking passed away at the age of 76. His death carried a strange cosmic symbolism. He died on Pi Day, March 14th, the same day that Albert Einstein was born. And Hawking himself had been born exactly 300 years after the death of Galileo Galilei, another revolutionary scientist who had changed humanity's understanding of the universe. It was almost as if history had arranged these dates deliberately. For millions of people, Stephen Hawking was the physicist in the wheelchair with a computerized voice. Some knew him from his best-selling book A Brief History of Time. Others recognized him from his appearances in television shows like The Big Bang Theory, Star Trek, or The Simpsons. But behind the pop culture icon was something much deeper. A scientist who spent his entire life trying to answer the most fundamental questions ever asked. Where did the universe come from? What happens inside a black hole? And perhaps the biggest question of all, why does anything exist at all? Stephen Hawking once said something very simple about his goal in life. "My goal is simple," he said. "It is a complete understanding of the universe, why it is as it is and why it exists at all." It was a goal so enormous that it seemed almost impossible. But Hawking was not the kind of person who was easily discouraged. In fact, the greatest obstacle he would face had nothing to do with physics, it came from his own body. At the age of 21, Stephen Hawking was diagnosed with a rare and devastating disease that doctors believed would kill him within just a few years. Yet instead of giving up, he went on to change modern physics. This is the story of Stephen Hawking, the man who tried to understand time, space, and the universe itself. Stephen William Hawking was born on January 8, 1942, in Oxford, England. His parents were both highly educated and deeply interested in science and learning. His father, Frank Hawking, was a medical researcher who specialized in tropical diseases. His mother, Isabel Hawking, was also academically minded and had studied philosophy, politics, and economics at Oxford. Education and intellectual curiosity were central parts of the Hawking household. But Stephen was not exactly a typical prodigy. As a child, he was curious and thoughtful, but he was not considered an outstanding student. In fact, some of his teachers thought he was rather slow. His handwriting was messy, his school work was sometimes careless, and he often seemed more interested in thinking about ideas than completing assignments. Yet the people who knew him closely understood something important. Stephen Hawking was not slow. He was simply thinking, a lot. From a very young age, he was fascinated by how things worked. He would take clocks apart just to see their mechanisms. He tried to understand machines, systems, and patterns. The universe, in many ways, looked like one giant puzzle to him. During his teenage years, Hawking attended St. Albans School, located about 20 miles north of London. There, his interest in science began to grow stronger. Although he loved mathematics, there was a small problem. The school he attended did not offer a specialized mathematics program. So instead, Hawking focused on physics. It turned out to be a decision that would shape the rest of his life. Physics allowed him to ask questions about the deepest laws of nature. Why do planets move the way they do? What is gravity? What is time? And perhaps most fascinating of all, how did the universe begin? These questions would eventually define his career. But first, Hawking had to take the next step in his education, and that meant going to one of the most famous universities in the world. At the age of 17, Stephen Hawking was accepted into Oxford University. Interestingly, Oxford did not offer the mathematics program he wanted at that time, So, once again, he chose physics instead. Oxford was an intimidating place for many students. It had centuries of academic tradition and extremely high standards. But Hawking quickly realized something surprising. Compared to many of his classmates, he did not need to study as much. He was able to grasp complex concepts very quickly. In fact, he later admitted that during his 3 years at Oxford, he studied only about 1 hour per day on average. Instead, he spent much of his time thinking, discussing ideas with friends, and participating in social activities. One of the things he enjoyed most was rowing. Although Hawking himself was not physically strong enough to be one of the main rowers, he became the coxswain, the person who steers the boat and gives commands to the team. His bold steering style sometimes led to dramatic races and occasional crashes, but it also made him quite popular among his teammates. Despite his relaxed approach to studying, Hawking's intelligence was undeniable. When it came time for his final examinations, he faced an important challenge. His grades were borderline between a first-class degree and a second-class degree. A first-class degree would allow him to continue to graduate studies at Cambridge. A second-class degree might not. During his oral examination, one of the professors asked Hawking about his future plans. Hawking gave a very honest answer. He said, "If I receive a first-class degree, I will go to Cambridge. If I receive a second-class degree, I will stay at Oxford." The professors looked at each other. They knew exactly how brilliant he was. And they also knew that Cambridge would be the perfect place for him to continue his studies. So they awarded him a first-class honors degree in natural sciences. It was a decision that would change the course of scientific history, because Cambridge was where Stephen Hawking would begin studying cosmology, the science of the universe itself. And it was there that his life would take a dramatic and unexpected turn. After graduating from Oxford, Stephen Hawking moved to another legendary institution, the University of Cambridge. Cambridge was one of the most important centers of physics and cosmology in the world. Centuries earlier, Isaac Newton had worked there and developed the foundations of classical mechanics. Now, generations later, Hawking arrived with a simple but ambitious goal. He wanted to study cosmology, the science that tries to understand the entire universe. At the time, cosmology was still a relatively young field. Scientists were only beginning to understand the true scale and origin of the cosmos. Just a few decades earlier, astronomers had discovered that the universe was expanding. This discovery suggested something extraordinary. If the universe was expanding today, then in the past it must have been smaller, and if you go far enough back in time, everything might have started from a single point. This idea became known as the Big Bang Theory. For Hawking, it was the perfect scientific mystery. Instead of studying small systems like atoms or individual stars, cosmologists studied the entire universe itself. But Hawking's arrival at Cambridge coincided with something unexpected, something that would change his life forever. During his first year at Cambridge, Hawking began noticing something strange. At first, it seemed minor. He occasionally became clumsy. Sometimes he tripped while walking. His speech occasionally sounded slightly slurred. At first, he ignored it, but the symptoms slowly became worse. Concerned, his doctors decided to perform a series of medical tests. The results were devastating. At the age of 21, Stephen Hawking was diagnosed with amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, also known as ALS. ALS is a progressive neurological disease. It slowly destroys the nerve cells that control muscle movement. As the disease advances, patients gradually lose the ability to walk, speak, swallow, and eventually even breathe. However, there is one cruel detail about ALS. The disease usually does not affect the brain. The mind remains fully aware while the body slowly stops functioning. When Hawking received the diagnosis, doctors gave him a terrifying prediction. They believed he had only 2 years to live. For a 21-year-old student who had just begun his scientific career, it was almost impossible to process. Hawking later described this period as one of deep depression. For a while, he lost motivation. After all, what was the point of pursuing a long-term scientific career if he would not live long enough to finish it? But something unexpected happened. Hawking did not die. The disease progressed more slowly than expected. And during that time, another important event changed his perspective on life. He met a woman named Jane Wilde. Jane was studying languages at Cambridge. The two quickly formed a strong connection. Their relationship gave Hawking something he had almost lost: hope. Jane encouraged him to continue his work. She believed that his life still had meaning and purpose, and Hawking began to believe it too. Years later, he would say that his illness actually gave him a new perspective on life. He realized something powerful. When you suddenly discover that your time may be limited, you begin to appreciate every moment much more deeply. Instead of giving up, Hawking returned to his research with renewed determination. If he had only a few years left, he would use them to understand the universe. Against all medical expectations, Stephen Hawking did not die within 2 years. He lived and he continued working. Year after year, while his physical condition slowly deteriorated, his scientific ideas became stronger. His body was weakening, but his mind was expanding toward the cosmos. Over time, Hawking gradually lost the ability to walk. Eventually, he began using a wheelchair. Later, he lost the ability to write normally. And in 1985, after a serious case of pneumonia, doctors had to perform a tracheotomy to save his life. The surgery allowed him to breathe, but it permanently removed his ability to speak. For most people, losing the ability to speak would have meant the end of their career. For a scientist whose work depended on communication and lectures, it could have been devastating. But technology offered a solution. Engineers developed a special speech synthesizer connected to a computer. Hawking could select words on the screen using a small hand movement. Later, when even that movement became impossible, he controlled the system using a tiny muscle in his cheek. The computer converted his text into the now famous robotic voice. It was not his natural voice. In fact, it had an American accent, even though Hawking was British, but he liked it. And eventually, that electronic voice became one of the most recognizable voices in the world. Through this system, Hawking could write scientific papers, give lectures, and even tell jokes, yes, jokes. Despite everything he was facing, Hawking maintained a remarkable sense of humor, he once said. My expectations were reduced to 0 when I was 21. Everything since then has been a bonus. This mindset allowed him to continue doing what he loved most, thinking about the universe. And soon, his research would lead him to one of the most astonishing discoveries in modern physics, a discovery that would completely change how scientists understand black holes. By the late 1960s and early 1970s, Stephen Hawking had already become one of the most promising young minds in cosmology. His focus was on black holes, regions of space where gravity is so strong that nothing, not even light, can escape. At first, black holes were considered simple cosmic vacuum cleaners. Once something fell in, it was gone forever. But Hawking asked a daring question. What if black holes are not completely black? Using the mathematics of quantum mechanics combined with Einstein's general relativity, Hawking made a startling prediction. He discovered that black holes are not completely invisible. They emit tiny amounts of radiation. Over time, this radiation causes the black hole to lose mass and eventually evaporate. This phenomenon became known as Hawking radiation. It was a radical idea. For decades, black holes had been thought to be eternal and inescapable. Hawking showed that they are not. His theory changed physics forever. It also opened a door to one of the greatest challenges in science. How can we unite quantum mechanics and general relativity, the laws of the very small and the very large, into one unified theory of the universe? Stephen Hawking's ambition went even further. He did not just want to understand black holes. He wanted to discover the theory of everything, a single framework that could explain all physical phenomena, from the tiniest subatomic particle to the largest galaxy. This meant reconciling quantum physics, which governs the microscopic world, with Einstein's theory of relativity, which governs the cosmic scale. Imagine trying to combine the rules of chess with the rules of football into one single game. This is what Hawking attempted, but on a cosmic scale. Together with mathematician Roger Penrose, Hawking explored the mathematics of singularities, the points where space and time become infinitely curved. They showed that the universe must have begun from a singularity, a moment that can now be scientifically described as the Big Bang. Hawking also explored the boundaries of the universe. He proposed that time itself had a beginning, a starting point of the cosmos. No longer was the universe infinite in the past. No longer was the origin of time a mystery beyond science. Through these theories, Hawking moved closer to a single unified vision of the cosmos. And yet, he was always aware of the philosophical implications of his work. Hawking often addressed the question, is there a need for a creator if the universe can be explained entirely by science? He never claimed absolute certainty. But he believed that as science progresses, the universe's mysteries could be explained without invoking divine intervention. While Hawking's discoveries were revolutionary in the scientific community, he also wanted to share them with the world. In 1988, he published A Brief History of Time. It was not just a science book, it was a global phenomenon. The book explained complex concepts like black holes, the Big Bang, and the nature of time in a way that non-scientists could understand. Illustrations, analogies, and careful explanations allowed millions to read and comprehend the universe as never before. Hawking became more than a scientist, he became a pop culture icon. From television shows like Star Trek, where he played poker with Albert Einstein and Isaac Newton, to The Simpsons, where he appeared as a witty, humorous character, Hawking bridged the gap between rigorous science and popular imagination. Even with the limitations of Al's, he traveled the world giving lectures, inspiring students, and participating in conferences. His fame did not diminish his intellectual rigor. He continued to publish groundbreaking research. He mentored students, expanded his theories, and contributed to mathematics and physics until the very end of his life. Through books, television appearances, and public lectures, Hawking's voice reached millions. Not just the voice of a man in a wheelchair, but the voice of curiosity, resilience, and genius. Even today, his ideas continue to challenge scientists and inspire future generations. Stephen Hawking was not only a scientific legend, he became a global cultural icon. For millions, he was instantly recognizable as the man in the wheelchair with a computerized voice. Yet Hawking embraced this attention. He appeared on television shows that reached audiences far beyond the scientific community. In Star Trek: The Next Generation, he famously played poker with Albert Einstein and Isaac Newton. Hawking won the game, of course, and the episode cleverly highlighted his wit and intellect. He also appeared in The Simpsons, Futurama, and even The Big Bang Theory, interacting with characters inspired by real scientists. Through these appearances, he showed the world that a physicist could be both brilliant and humorous, serious and playful. Hawking had turned his illness into a symbol of resilience, and his voice, his image, and his humor became a way for science to reach the masses. By bridging the gap between pop culture and high-level physics, Hawking inspired millions, especially young people, to look at the stars and wonder. Stephen Hawking's life was more than equations and theories. It was a lesson in courage, perseverance, and the power of curiosity. He faced a disease that should have ended his life in 2 years, but he lived for more than 5 decades after his diagnosis. Hawking often reflected on this in his public talks. Life would be tragic if it weren't funny. Even if life seems difficult, there's always something you can do and succeed at. It matters that you don't just give up. He taught the world the value of resilience, that physical limitations do not define intellectual potential, that humor, curiosity, and optimism can persist even in the face of immense challenges. He also believed in exploration beyond Earth. Hawking warned that humanity might face catastrophic risks on our planet, and he supported the idea of human colonies in space. Yet above all, Hawking wanted us to look up at the stars rather than down at our feet and to keep asking questions. His personal philosophy was simple yet profound. Never give up, keep learning, share knowledge, and embrace the mystery of the universe. Stephen Hawking passed away on March 14, 2018, at the age of 76. The world mourned one of the greatest scientific minds since Albert Einstein. But Hawking's legacy is more than his scientific discoveries. He transformed our understanding of black holes, cosmology, and the origin of the universe. He brought complex science to millions through books like A Brief History of Time, making physics accessible and inspiring a new generation. He showed that a disability cannot limit the human mind, and he demonstrated that humor, curiosity, and courage are as important as intelligence. Today, students, scientists, and dreamers all over the world look to Hawking as a source of inspiration. From Cambridge to Hollywood, from the pages of his books to the screens of television, his voice continues to resonate. As Hawking himself once said, "Remember to look up at the stars and not down at your feet." Try to make sense of what you see and wonder about what makes the universe exist. Be curious, and however difficult life may seem,